Hello again. This time in the second part, let's get deeper into something more practical, which is how to model topics and partitions and in general, what to publish these topics. Let's start with the basics. So before publishing anything, we need to have some topics and partitions to publish things in the first place. There's really no silver bullet here as far as modeling goes, and this will be highly dependent on the needs of your ecosystem. However, there are things that are more likely to work and less likely to work. And certainly having one topic for everything and separate topic for every event won't work. You will either make it very difficult to scale and perform well, or you will lose causality. So these two extreme opposites are something to definitely be avoided. What would be some good rules of thumb then? So practically speaking, topic is a concept of grouping things together that are somehow close or related to each other. So similar things will probably go to the same topic. But the number of topics itself is a tricky thing to figure out, as this might depend also how the messages are consumed. Maybe some consumers won't be interested in some events at all, so it's worth considering also consumers' perspective. Not only things make sense from the producer's perspective. However, producers shouldn't be too much coupled to the logic behind consumers from multiple consumer groups, so some reasonable balance is required here. We have some idea what should go to topics and how to group things, but what about partitions? The most important thing is to keep in mind that the events are ordered only within a given partition of the topic, not a topic in general. So if you have some concept of a tenant in the application, like user or account model, probably you should use their ID as a partition key. That way you will ensure that the events will be properly ordered. And now that we've covered topics and partitions, let's think about publishing events. So maybe let's start with what not to publish, as this might be a simpler question to answer. Unless you care about literally database replication or an audit log or something very close to it, don't publish things similar to paper trail versions, which would be like serializing models using as JSON method and distributing basically JSONified database rows. This can easily lead to distributed monoliths. Publishing just a raw projection of the entities is a very poor way of encapsulating any domain concepts. And the counter question, what to publish? One example would be domain events. So no payment updated with some random attributes, but rather something like payment paid, and the payload of such event would include some attributes related to the event, like amount and currency, maybe the timestamp when the payment was paid, the transaction ID coming from the payment gateway, and things like this. And also you can handle inframetrics or activity tracking, which is kind of like publishing domain events, except these are not necessarily domain events, but analytics. So you can publish, for example, page visited event with user's ID, timestamp when the visit time, and perhaps the URL of the page. One more example that would be interesting is somehow a major improvement of the concept that was mentioned in what not to publish part. So we should not publish raw projections of the records like JSONified database rows, but it might be a good idea to publish resources projections as an analogy to HTTP REST API resources that don't necessarily map one-to-one to the database tables. This gets especially interesting if you publish this kind of resources as if you were doing also site loading via HTTP API, so basically including relationships in the payload. For example, you can publish invoice together with invoice services in a single event, even if these are separate database records, although they are related ones, which kind of makes it closer to something like a MongoDB document. Or maybe a better analogy would be a domain-driven design style aggregate that would respect transactional boundaries and keep the state consistent, which is clearly the case for invoices example. So in that sense, you could publish invoice created event that would contain invoice data itself, customers data, services of the invoice, and things like this. Doesn't matter if there are separate relationships or not. It's merely an implementation detail that might not even be exposed outside the producer. We've covered the design and modeling aspects, so we can try to apply what we've discussed to some example domain or an application. It could be something very generic. We've already used examples concerning invoices, so let's stick to this. One example how to model this would be introducing 3 topics. First of them being companies and everything related to them, as the companies are the actual end users of the system. This can include some companies itself and events related to them and some other related entities, for example, the list of bank accounts for these companies. The second topic would be what we need the most, so everything related to the invoices. So invoices, services on the invoices, customers, addresses, payment terms, when the invoice is paid, when it's issued, and so forth. And we could imagine having a billing topic as well. The companies will somehow need to be charged for using the invoicing app. Well, let's hope that they will be charged. So this could include the list of payments for subscription, whatever else is related to the subscription itself, maybe some discount codes as well. The number of partitions is something not really obvious, and we'll also get back to this later in advanced Kafka part, but probably 10 partitions per topic wouldn't be a bad idea here. But it might also turn out that so many partitions will not be needed, so it really depends on the expected throughput. And again, this is just an example. Don't try to replicate it if you happen to work with invoicing systems, as this might not be ideal for your particular use case. Thanks for watching the second part of this mini course. Now that we have some idea about Kafka and know a bit more about designing topics, let's get some hands-on experience and build 2 applications, one of them being a consumer and one of them being a producer. So see you in the next part.